Good morning, I'm Stephanie with Illinois Ag in the Classroom, and today we're going to be talking about the new activity, Rumination Navigation. And this activity was written to help students understand more of how the ruminant digestive system works and how our beef cattle and dairy cattle can take grass and grains and eat them and then turn them into the energy that they need and then into the food that we need to eat. So today we're going to be specifically focusing on how the process works of digesting that food. In this activity, you get your normal lesson plan, extension ideas, and then the students are going to get a worksheet that goes along with their setup. And then the activity itself takes them through all the steps. It kind of looks like a game board, so it's a little bit fun. So it'll take them through all the steps of measuring out the materials, telling them which bags and stomach compartments that all of the stuff needs to go through. And then at the end, we have a labeled diagram of a cow and some extension questions for them to answer. Okay, so as a part of the setup instructions for the students, first they're going to check to make sure they have all of their materials. Then they're going to label all of their materials like we showed. And then the next thing is to set up some of the liquids that would already be found in the different compartments and the paper towels that just represent those different compartments absorbing the materials. So the two paper towels will be folded and put into the small intestine baggie. 2 of the paper towels will be folded and put in the Abomasum paper or baggie. And then 1/4 cup of water is going to be measured out and put into the Rumen baggie. And that just represents the liquids that are found in the rumen. They take up about half of the rumen. So we'll measure out 1/4 cup of water and put that into the rumen. And then seal that shut. And then we need, in the Abomasum, we're going to need 1/8 cup of a carbonated drink. Now I have Sprite here, but you could use any sort of soda, you could use LaCroix, any sort of carbonated drink, and that just represents the stomach acids. And the Abomasum is the chamber in the ruminant stomach that is most similar to our monogastric stomachs that we have here. So these are the stomach acids. So once your students have all of this set up, everything labeled, these 4 materials put into the baggies, then they are ready to start the activity. So the first part of the digestive system is going to be the mouth. That's where the ruminants or the cows are going to be taking in their food, chewing it up, and then swallowing it. So that is a really important part of the digestive system. So we're going to take 1/4 cup of your food. Now we suggested using potato sticks just because it kind of looks like grass, but you can use any sort of chip that kind of will absorb the water and also start to break down but not completely dissolve. And so we're just going to measure out 1/4 cup of the food into the mouth baggie. And then we're going to measure out 1 tablespoon of water. Now the tablespoon of water is representing the saliva that the mouth produces that starts to help break down the food in the mouth as the cow is chewing. So we'll just pour in 1 tablespoon of water. And then you're going to seal up the baggie and start to kind of mush together the water and the food. Now, since this is part of the ruminants, and we know that ruminants don't completely chew up their food right away, they're taking in a lot of food, you don't need to crunch this up super, super small. So we're just looking at pieces about this big. Okay, so just a few. Their fingers are representing the back molars of the cow that is chewing the food. And if you want to talk about how they chew side to side, you could definitely do that. Now that our food is chewed up, we are going to swallow the food. So we have our spoon, which is representing our esophagus. And so your students will just scoop out the food from the mouth, and it might take a couple scoops, and you're going to put it into the rumen. So when you first swallow the food, or when the cows first swallow the food, the very first chamber it goes into is the rumen, and that's the largest chamber. So we're going to plop that right down into there. The students are going to read about how the rumen is already filled with liquids and the top portion is filled with gases. So now that you have swallowed all of your food, you're then going to measure out 1 teaspoon of your Pop Rocks. And your Pop Rocks are representing all of the little microbes and microorganisms that are living in the cow's stomach and are going to be eating and breaking down that food. So you're going to pour that in there, and it's going to make a fun bubbling sound, so you can have your students listen to that and talk about how that is the microbes eating the food that the cow has actually eaten. So then we're going to zip that back up. And a huge part of the rumen is that it has contractions. And so to kind of represent those contractions, you can squeeze the top part and just kind of lift up and drop. And you can see that the food and the water and the microbes in there are going to be moving around. And so when that happens, some of that gets pushed over into the reticulum, and that is going to be the next step. So on their sheets, we're going to see that some of the liquid gets poured into the reticulum. Some is going to go through to the omasum. So you need to have the omasum open and ready. And then you're going to take your reticulum, which is just a paint strainer, super easy. And then you're going to pour all of the contents from the rumen through the reticulum and into the omasum. So if you have students working together, it's best if you have one student holding the baggie open and one student dumping. So I'm just going to plop this right into there, get all of the food, and the microbes are going to pass along with it, and that is a part of the digestive system that you can talk about. So now you can see the liquid portion has gone through into the omasum. And then in the reticulum, the food that is not digested, it's not small enough to continue into the omasum, has gotten stuck in the reticulum. And at that point, the cow is going to regurgitate all of that food. It's going to be held in the reticulum till it's ready to chew its cud, and that is what our rumination is. And so what you're going to do then, once you get all of the liquid out, is then take your esophagus. Where did my esophagus go? Right here. We're going to take your esophagus again, get all of that food out of the reticulum, and it is going back into the mouth to be chewed even further. So that is the next step. Get all this food out of there. Now what's going to happen is you're going to zip this baggie back up and you're going to break it down even further. Now, your students can do this with their hands or with their measuring cups. You can have them kind of mush it up and talk about how the cows are going to spend, several hours chewing that food to make sure that it's completely broken down so that it can be fully digested. And then we're going to take a pause from that moment and read through the pit stop. Okay, so at this point in the activity, your students have made their way through the entire first part of the worksheet and have gotten down here where it's talking about how the regurgitation and rechewing is what is often called chewing the cud. So the first complete worksheet is done. Now the second part of this starts at the bottom, and there's a little section here called a pit stop where it just explains that normally the cow is going to rechew the food like we just showed. It's going to go back through the esophagus, back into the rumen. It's going to stay there so the microorganisms can break it down even further, and then it's going to, the contractions are going to keep happening and spilling over into the reticulum, and anything that's in the reticulum that is broken down enough to move through is going to pass through to the omasum. However, for just the sake of this activity, it explains that we're not going to redo all those steps. We're just going to move right forward to the omasum as if everything is broken down enough to move on through. So at this point, we're just going to use our spoon. Our food has been rechewed and is nice and mushy and disgusting looking. And you're just going to ball it up kind of like in a wad, which is what is called a bolus. And we're going to put that into the omasum baggie. Okay, in the omasum, that compartment is responsible for absorbing a lot of the liquids, the waters. It's continuously breaking down the food and the nutrients and absorbing that into the lining and then taking it through the bloodstream to where it needs to go. So the paper towels in the omasum are representing that idea that that nutrients and liquids are being absorbed. So once we're done with that, it passes on through to the abomasum. So your students can either just kind of carefully plop it in there, or you could just use your spoon, depending on how dirty you want things to get, or anything like that. So I'm just going to use the spoon. The food is moving on into the abomasum. Now the abomasum, like I said previously, is the most similar compartment that would is most similar to the human monogastric stomach, and so it produces those acids that further break that down. So we have all of the acids on here. You can see that kind of separated that wad of food, and now it's kind of more liquidy again. So we have a further breakdown. After the abomasum, we're going to get into the small intestine. So what you're going to do is have your kiddos open that baggie and then just carefully dump everything from the abomasum into the small intestine baggie. Now again, there are paper towels in the small intestine because one of the functionalities of the small intestine is to really absorb whatever liquids and waters are remaining from that food. I didn't get enough air out of here, so you want to get some of the air out of here. Zip it back up and then just kind of squeeze it. Make sure that the paper towels are absorbing a lot of that carbonated drink and any of the waters, anything that was in that food. So it's going to look kind of like this. Lastly then, you're gonna you can have your students just pull it right out and plop it down there, or I'm just going to use my spoon and go the cleaner route. And the last thing is your wad of food. It's a lot smaller amount than we started with, but you're going to plop that on the large intestine. Now, in the large intestine, there is an area between the large intestine and the small intestine called the cecum, which holds bacteria that is going to do similar breaking down as what was happening in the rumen with those microorganisms. So we're just gonna add, you can have your students either measure it out or pour it, so about a ½ teaspoon. They're gonna be breaking down that last little bit, whatever is left in the food at that point that the body still needs and it isn't gonna be considered waste. You've got those little microorganisms there. You're going to dab and try to soak up all of the water that you can on the large intestine paper towel, and then you can kind of form it into like a maybe cylinder shape or a patty looking shape. And the last thing that you have right here is the waste, which is called a cow pie or your little poo. And that's our fun activity, and your students get a little fun treat at the end, but don't eat it. But that's our rumination activity.